Good afternoon. My name is Steve Grubb, and I'm the Chief Talent Officer here in Highline. And I want to welcome each of you and thank you for taking time to join us this afternoon. Dr. Enfield will be talking with us today, but also on Thursday, January 14th, with similar content as what we are sharing today. This webinar, today's, is intended to provide information to staff prior to Thursday's conversation that is designed to be with and for our families. As you may have questions that are more employee-centered, I'd like to invite you to the Q&A, the question and answer, as well as the breakout rooms available to you after the whole group portion of today's webinar. We will also be posting this webinar on our website. As I mentioned, I'll be joined today by our superintendent, Dr. Susan Enfield, our Chief Academic Officer, Suzanne Jurdy, our Chief Operations Officer, Scott Logan, and our Chief Family and Community Engagement Officer, Kisa Hendrickson, as well as a number of colleagues monitoring and responding to the Q&A in real time. We know that additional questions are likely to arise over the course of today's webinar. As I previously shared, we have staff monitoring the Q&A to address your questions in real time. In addition, we will note questions for follow-up after today's webinar. To submit your questions, please click on the Q&A icon highlighted at the bottom of your screen as illustrated here in the green box. So at this time, I'd like to introduce Dr. Enfield, our superintendent, to help kick off our time together.
Thank you, Steve, and hello, everybody. It's good to see all of you. Before we begin, and we've got an action-packed half hour before we send you off into breakout groups for conversation, I just want everyone to join me in just taking a long, good, deep breath. One of my New Year's resolutions is to get better at that, to center myself, to calm myself, especially when we're dealing with issues of such significance and such emotion as the return to school has. So Evan is going to man the PowerPoint for me. Thank you, Evan and Linda, and so many on our team who worked so hard to pull this presentation together. I'm grateful for that. So as you know, we always begin with our Highline Promise, which that's okay. I think everyone knows it by now, Evan. You can go on to the next slide. Our Highline Promise to know every student by name, strength, and need, and that guides everything we do. And so when we talk about our guiding principles, and we have used these since last spring, when we first had our very first conversations during the initial weeks and months of school building closure, to discuss what a hybrid might look like, and being guided by our promise, obviously following public health guidelines, which is not always easy, given that they have changed and continue to change, and that even public health officials in our state are not always in agreement. So following those guidelines to the best of our ability, engaging you, our families, our students, as best we can in this virtual environment. And then as we look at bringing students back, how are we prioritizing the needs of those students who rely most on school? And knowing that we need to provide as many of our students as possible with a safe, in-person learning environment, because we know that's what's best for the vast majority of them. Evan? So, going to take a quick look back, and then we're going to start looking forward. So, as you know, we're coming up, it's hard to believe, but we are now nearly almost to the day, 10 months into full remote learning. And I made the difficult decision in July that we would remain in full distance learning for at least the first half of the school year, meaning through at least till we came back from the break. And we made the decision, I think back in October, yes, that we would dip our toe in the water of a return to in-person learning by bringing back students in our ILC program and CBS, and that has been wonderful. We have seen such happy faces, our students and our staff, frankly. I visited a number of the classrooms, and our ILC CBS staff are truly, truly amazing, and our building leaders and our office staff and custodians, everyone who's worked to pull that off. And it's been going beautifully. And there was a ton of anxiety when we started that. But once we got into it and people realized the safety measures we had in place and saw that it was doable, we really got into a rhythm and are in a rhythm now. And we have some very, very happy students. And so we have, continued to support those students and know that we have to use the lessons we've learned from the ILC CBS return to bringing back more students. In December, the governor changed the threshold by which it allows us to bring students back to in-person learning. And that means that today, even with numbers where they are in the community, we can bring our youngest learners back for in-person learning as long as we have all of the safety measures in place around distancing, masks, cleaning, et cetera. And so we have been spending significant time figuring out how we begin bringing our elementary students and more of our students with special needs back. And that is what we want to talk to you about today. Evan? So I referenced this, the state guidance, as you can see, even when we're in the high category, they are supporting a model such as we have, bringing back students in a hybrid with all safety measures in place. Evan, next one. These are the COVID activity rates in our region. I understand that there is there's some dissonance here. I get it because I experienced it too. There's dissonance in seeing our numbers are going up, and yet we want to bring students back into school. But again, we have so many examples from across the country and within our state where we're seeing a safe return to in-person learning with safety measures in place in spite of what's happening in the community, and that bringing students back for in-school learning is not leading to additional community spread. So I want to acknowledge the dissonance, but also really be clear that we are not seeing that the return to in-person learning in other places is contributing to that. Next slide. So here are some of our wonderful folks who are working masked, and I guess if they're alone in a room by themselves, unmasked, doing remote instruction. Everybody has been working incredibly hard, and I want to say thank you to everyone in Highline who has been bringing their A game, maybe their A+ game, since last March, to make sure that our students, our families, and fellow staff members had the supports that they need in order to get the job done. Evan? And so here's what we know, and none of this will be a surprise to most of you. We know that our students' social emotional development and learning matters. We know that many of our students are suffering from the isolation of learning at home. I'm hearing so much from high school students. Every high school student I talk to talks about waning to non-existent motivation at this point to do their schoolwork. And especially our younger learners are really struggling with having to learn independently. And all of this, the mental health toll this is taking, the academic toll this is taking, the social emotional, the absence of routines and the toll that that's taking. All of this really compels us to find a way to return our students to some kind of in-person learning as quickly and safely as we can. Evan? So this is our current plan. This is where we are today. We are saying that effective March 1st, not February 1st. Our goal is that our plan will be solidified by February 1st, but we will not execute that plan until March so that everybody is familiar with it and we're fully prepared. On March 1st, our goal is to bring back our ILC and CBS programs, pre-K-12, and continue that, and add pre-K, K-1, and our IAC programs, K-12. That would be the first phase of our phase-in plan beginning March 1st. We would implement that. We would make sure that we had that really, really humming, going well, and no sooner than 2 weeks after that, could be 2 weeks, could be 3, depending on where we are, bring back then grades 2 and 3. Once we've established that, then again, no sooner than 2 weeks, we would look at bringing back grades 4 and 5, because per the governor's recommendation order, that we can bring back pre-K through 5 and our students with special needs in these small groups in this way. I want to emphasize, central office has worked hand in hand with building leaders and staff and our HEA leadership and partners in making sure that we have solid safety plans for every school building. We have adequate, more than adequate at this point, stores of PPE. And as you know, we continue to provide weekly updates as best we can on what we know. All of that has been in place and will continue to be in place. While planning will continue for middle and high later on, right now, we just don't have guidance on that. Our numbers do not support us bringing our middle and high school students back right now. So our attention, our focus right now is on elementary. Let's get that right. And then my goal, my hope is that later in the spring, we could then perhaps transition, depending on where we are, into a middle school return, which could then potentially lead into a high school return. Evan? So as I said, here's your phase in, just to make sure that everybody's clear. We have our ILC and CBS students in now. Next phase, March 1st, pre-K, K, first grade, and IAC programs K-12. Phase 3, students in grades 2 and 3. Phase 4, students in grades 4 and 5. Evan? So this again is just a sort of, and I know that some of this feels repetitive, but here's one big lesson I've learned over the last several months. And we are all in a state of high emotion, high anxiety, exhaustion, frustration, whatever it may be, it's hard to take in a lot of information, especially new information. And so what I'm finding is it's really important for myself included to emphasize, re-emphasize, so that everybody is clear and on the same page. Evan? And I want to end with this before I turn it back to Steve. Highline is not alone in this. Puyallup welcomed students back today. Sumner and Eatonville have students back. Bellevue has students back. Seattle is planning, I believe, I don't know if it's changed. They were talking about a March 1st return, but virtually every district in our region is planning for a return sometime in January, February, or March. We felt that the March 1st date allowed us more than adequate time to finalize the good planning that is in place already so that we go in strong and prepared to keep our staff and our students and our community as safe as we can. And so I just want to thank you. I know that this is challenging, but we will continue to share with you the best information we have and take your feedback and hear your questions and respond as best we can. So thank you. Thank you very much for your dedication and your patience and your partnership. Steve?
Thank you, Dr. Enfield, for the clarity of that review of our plan for a hybrid return. I'd like to preview the remainder of our time together. Next, we're going to review health and safety, then accommodations and leaves, our instructional model, next steps, and then we'll be off to our breakout rooms. So at this time, I'd like to introduce Kisa Hendrickson, our Chief Engagement and Partnership Officer, and she will be followed by Scott Logan, our Chief Operations Officer. Kisa?
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. I want to share a little bit about a few things we're doing to keep everyone as safe as possible, and we'll kick it over to Scott Logan, who will share even more details. But one thing that's important to know is that since we've opened for our ILC and CBS program, you can see on the slide, it's 17 schools, about 155 students and 144 staff, we have had, that has been reported to us and to our knowledge, 0 staff who've contracted COVID as a result of being in close contact with a student or a student being in close contact with an adult. So what that suggests to us is that the safety measures that we are putting in place are actually helping mitigate the spread, and also confirming what we've been hearing across the nation really is that being in school in person isn't increasing the community spread. Next slide, please, Evan. 2 exciting things that we are working on. First and foremost, we are one of 12 school districts in the state who are currently piloting on-site COVID testing. We are in the process of planning for this, including hiring a staff person using CARES Act money to support this important work. What you can expect is that about once a week at least, there will be on-site COVID testing available to staff and students who have either been exposed or believed to have contracted COVID. So we are working on critical details such as location, days of the week, and permissions forms and all the things we need. This test, good news I'm going to share with you, is not the stick up into your brain test. It's actually an oral mouth swab. It's still the PCR test, the most reliable test, and they will be self-administered. So those are a couple of important things. So please stay tuned for more details on that. In addition, I am certain you've been hearing about vaccinations, particularly for school employees. And so while we are awaiting to hear when school employees will be eligible to start receiving those, we are in partnership with Safeway and Albertsons Pharmacy so that we will be ready to go once those vaccinations are available to school staff. We will have locations. We will be, a team of us, cross-departmental team will be working to determine, you know, who are the most critical staff and then rolling it out in phases. So please stay tuned on that. The vaccinations will not be mandatory, but they will be available to staff. Thank you, Evan. Next slide. One of the most important things I would like to share with you is that we have a very clear process in place about how to respond to on-site COVID cases. Staff have been in buildings since the start of the school year, and then students came back a couple of months thereafter. And so we've been able to massage and work our reporting process. And one of the things I want to stress to you is that if you have contracted COVID or suspect you have contracted COVID, the most important thing is to notify your supervisor immediately. And from there, it triggers a response where we're collecting the important information from you, your demographic information, as well as information about where you've been on school sites and who you've been in close contact with. And from there, our health services team is connecting with public health as necessary. And we are working with departments and schools as necessary to determine any other additional notifications that need to be made, deep cleaning, communications. We are committed to being transparent and communicating anytime there is a positive case on site. We will send out a communication to that school or department community so everyone knows. But also the most important thing to know is if you have been exposed as a result of being at your work site, you'll receive direct communication letting you know that you've been exposed. So we are doing our best to make sure that we are communicating as clearly and quickly as possible in the instances of COVID cases. And that is all I have. So with that, I'm going to kick it over to my friend, Scott Logan.
All right. Thank you, Keith. Appreciate all that information and all the work you and your departments have been doing. Looking forward to getting tests and getting vaccines happening on school sites. That's exciting. So I want to talk a little bit about safety plans and just to kind of give updates for those that need updates and hopefully a little clarity or for those that are already familiar. Each school has a comprehensive safety plan that's a living document, continues to be drafted, revisited, revised as both we learn from the work we're already doing and the guidelines, expectation, and rules that either come from the state or Department of Health or CDC get adjusted and changed as those groups learn as well as we live through and work through this COVID timeline. Those safety plans, they're going to include different plans for the buildings, how students and staff will access the building, where those entries will be, processes for reviewing student who shows up without an attestation, without a completed attestation. There's a process set in place to find, and each school is unique and different. Just like each school has a different footprint on the ground, there's different processes and efficient procedures that will work for all the different steps required to keep everybody safe. We've had principals, facilities, staff working together to help define these traffic patterns inside buildings, to put signage up to make it simple to understand which way you go. I was out at Valley View yesterday, and they have some pretty neat little dual language one-way signage that guides you around that building. You can get all the way around without ever retracing a step, and the intent is so that we don't have traffic passing each other. Some buildings we can't do one-way traffic down a hallway, but we can do two-way traffic with a separation down the center, and that works well. The safety plans are reviewed by a cross-departmental team, so we have building administrators along with our different labor parties represented at those tables, so that we make sure we get everybody's valuable opinion included as we work through this. Again, it's important to remember those are living documents that do get changed and adjusted as we live and learn through this process. So all of the safety measures that we deploy, none of them work by themselves. This is a plan that includes 5 steps you can see on your screen right now. The masking, or PPE, which is different for different roles, is one of the higher priority pieces of this, but hand washing is just as important. Physical distancing is important. The disinfecting of surfaces, which is unique and different depending on what happens in grade level and types of classrooms, that's important. And then the screening, the health attestations that most staff are familiar with now are being updated. Language is being updated currently. We had hoped to have the adult one done by now, but we're in the process of translation so that it's available in all language necessary. The Department of Health has changed some of the question, some of the symptom questions that we need to look for. So we're adjusting to move that up to today's most current information. Next slide is, here we go. So brief statement on PPE, and this is it's hard to be brief on PPE because there is a plethora of different types of PPE. We follow all the Department of Health and CDC guidelines as far as recommendations for PPE in the school environment based on different jobs and roles that people have. You'll see mask is mandatory for everybody. And then depending on the level of close contact there is with students or other staff, or staff with students with staff, you can see gowns, you can see gloves, you can see face masks, all clearly defined in our processes and in your safety guidelines. Ventilation requirements, we're in a pretty good position in Highline, and there are some that worry about an old building versus a new building, and I don't want to go way deep into this, but let me I'll just share this much. First of all, we have enhanced the filter cycle. We've shortened the timeline between the changing of filters within all of our systems to make sure we're maintaining good, clear filters. We want our filters to do a good job, but the constant changing of the enhanced cycle of changing allows for more air exchange from external outside air into the building. So we want not only clean filters, but we want to have a lot of air moving through those filters. For the most part, our district is 4 times or higher per hour that the air changes within a classroom or a learning space inside a building. Some of the older buildings, and this is an important thing to note, because a building doesn't have a central air system does not mean it doesn't have a safe system. And actually some of our older buildings that have the individual wall mount units that are mounted right on an exterior wall will actually exchange air in the vicinity of 8 minutes, just because there's a real short path between the outside and inside. We're not running through a whole ventilation system to move that air throughout a building. So the outside to inside air exchange is hugely important, and we recognize that, and we want to make sure we're doing that with our filters and not with open windows. Our filters actually, if you open windows, you're going to have less efficacy in our HVAC system because it imbalances the pressure within inside the building, and we don't exchange air as fast with an open window compared to our actual HVAC systems. Hopefully I've covered all of the, at least on top questions. If not, make sure they're in the Q&A and I will get to those. with that, I would transition back to Steve Grubb.
Yeah, thank you very much, Scott. I'd like to talk just briefly about staff accommodations and leaves. If you have concerns about your ability to physically report to work, please work directly with your supervisor and HR to explore your options. Many staff have already started this process following our webinar back in July. If you think you may need an accommodation or leave, feel free to begin that process with HR now if you have not already done so. There is no need to wait. Please be sure to contact HR directly and explore these options. In addition to unpaid personal leave or general leave, they could include family medical leave, emergency family medical leave, or emergency paid sick leave. Each person's situation is unique and confidential, and a couple of these leaves are news and added through legislation since COVID period had started. We expect many staff will be able to report to work for in-person instruction. As a reminder, if you think you may need an accommodation or leave, contact HR as soon as possible, and we will work with you and your supervisor to determine what is possible and appropriate. Each situation is unique and confidential. As the diagram in this slide illustrates, the employee begins the leaves or accommodation process in a conversation with HR. HR then works with supervisors to determine system needs and employee needs to move toward solutions. Leaves and accommodations are prioritized in alignment to the list provided in this slide. It begins with employees who have COVID or COVID exposure, employees who live with high-risk family members, and then proceeds to issues related to wearing face coverings. Our leaves and guest employee services lead, Laura Castaneda, whose phone number and email is shown here, is available to support you to get you what you need when you need it. With that, I'd like to turn it over to our Chief Academic Officer, Suzanne Jurdy, to talk about the instructional model.
Great. Thank you, Steve. And good afternoon to everyone. Yes, you will be receiving more detail in your breakout groups about the instructional model, but generally we wanted to give you a view of the thinking and planning that has gone on. And as Susan has said, we have learned so much from our ILC and CBS colleagues and students as they have implemented small number, but a great opportunity to learn. So for those families choosing in-person or hybrid, the students in each class will be placed into an A or a B cohort, with students attending in-person instruction for 4 days, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday, for 2 hours and 15 minutes each day. That would be either an AM session they would attend or a PM session. There is no lunch or recess being planned in this model, really allowing us to cut down on both the staff interaction, but student interaction as well. Students attending in-person instruction for the AM or PM would engage asynchronously for the other part of their school day at home. Now, they may have PE or music or library via Zoom, but they would not have synchronous instruction from their classroom teacher. They would be able to work independently or asynchronously on their classroom work. And you can also see here that Wednesdays will be only at-home distance learning, very similar to what we're providing right now. So this model would likely necessitate reassignment of students in order to provide daily instruction for families that choose to be fully remote. And you can see here that our current classes in the fall, or what we've experienced currently, as we move to hybrid, the students will need to be reassigned to ensure we're serving all the students who want to be in person, as well as those who want to be fully remote. It may also mean some reassignment of some school-based specialists, such as coaches or deans or other non-classroom teachers, as well as some reassignment of some of our central office specialists. The needs of our students and the needs of our classroom teachers is going to be paramount, but also is flexibility. Dual language has also been really important in our planning for this work. And so here's a high-level look at our DL model. It's very similar but has the distinctions of what is needed for language development. So teachers will also only see one group of students in the AM and one group of students in the PM each day. The students in a 2-teacher model will be with one teacher for 2 days on Monday and Tuesday, such as English, and then the other teacher for 2 days on Thursday and Friday, such as Spanish. During each of the 2.25-hour block, teachers will teach both integrated literacy and math to that group. And then on Wednesdays, just like their general ed colleagues, they'll remain in distance learning mode, very similar to what we're doing right now. And as Scott has, shared, there will be cleaning protocols that happen in between sessions and on Wednesdays to ensure that our staff and our students remain safe. So I know that was brief, and you'll have more details when you get into your breakout groups, but there's a few things I wanted to point out about this model. Not only are they indicators of this model, but they were really drivers. We really needed to make sure that whatever model we design, and it continues to refine with feedback and questions, is both effective for our students and our families, but it also has to be feasible for our teachers. And that was very important as we thought about how we put this together. So here's just a few things we want you to take away. First of all, the AM and the PM in person are intended and planned to be duplicate sessions of instruction with roughly half the class. So a teacher plans for those 2.25 hours and then repeats it rather than planning an additional 2.25 hours. Teachers in hybrid will see their students in person 4 days, which is a big plus and bonus in this model, which is also going to assist in providing tasks for asynchronous learners. So hybrid teachers will see their students remotely on Wednesday, as we're currently implementing, but on Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, they can see their kids and provide mini lessons and guided practice, and then send them off for that independent practice in a much easier manner than they can remotely currently. Hybrid teachers are not expected to be in contact with students during their asynchronous instruction. So teachers that are teaching in person are going to be focused on their in-person students at the time. We heard very clearly that that was important, and we've designed a model to ensure that it's a single focus at each time. And then students choosing to stay in full remote learning will not be taught by the hybrid teacher. Now that will mean some reassignment, but they will have a remote teacher that will teach them, or a distance learning teacher that will teach them, and the hybrid teacher will not be expected to teach both in person and our fully remote students. So that's a high level, more details coming, and I'll turn it back over to Dr. Grubb.
Thank you, Suzanne. So what to expect in terms of immediate next steps? We, as I mentioned earlier, had the family webinar on January 14th, and then family commitment window January 14th through the 28th. My colleagues and I have been answering the Q&A to the greatest degree possible in real time. If you have additional questions, you will be getting a feedback sheet at the conclusion of the breakout rooms. If you're not planning to go to a breakout room, the link is here on this slide. At this time, please join the appropriate breakout room by accessing the links shared in the chat or in the staff webinar reminder that was emailed to you this afternoon. We will not be reconvening as a whole group. You will be signing off from your breakout room. And I just want to thank everyone for their participation and attendance at this evening's webinar. Thank you.